From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. I want to thank Seth Berenswijk for filling in so ably last week. This week's panelists are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, columnist Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, columnist Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and Alexander Hefner, host of The Open Mind on PBS. Welcome, one and all. Okay, let's get to issue 1. Trump on trial.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this week signed the Articles of Impeachment against President Trump. Ratified by the House, the articles now arrive in the Senate. That chamber is due to commence its trial proceedings next week under presiding Judge Chief Justice John Roberts. But it's not yet clear what evidence and witnesses will be submitted before the senators. The president will be defended by his legal team, while 7 Democratic impeachment managers led by Congressman Adam Schiff will push for conviction.
Pat, is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell going to run a wrecking ball through Nancy Pelosi's carefully constructed plan here?
I think this is a Mitch McConnell versus Nancy Pelosi battle going on right now. Pelosi didn't get a single Republican vote in the House for impeachment. It is Mitch's job basically to get all 53 Republicans voting to exonerate the President of the United States. What Pelosi wants done and needs done, and the House Democrats need done, is to have the Senate do the investigation, get the subpoenas, get the testimony that they were unable or unwilling to get. And Mitch McConnell's job is basically to let them make their case. And once they make it, get a motion to dismiss and throw this thing right back to the House. And Mitch McConnell becomes the LBJ of the Republican Party.
Okay, Eleanor.
I believe the last word was that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans said there's no way they're going to have a motion to dismiss because they understand they have to take this seriously. And if you watched the walking over the articles last week, you saw the Chief Justice go into the chamber, you realize the weight of history is here. 3rd time in American history. And everyone who signed that oath knows that in the history books, their names are good. They're not exactly John Hancock, but this is a moment where there is some accountability. And I think there's a lot of pressure on the Republicans to allow more evidence to come forward that has broken since the House voted. And you also have the GAO, the General Accounting Office, which is a government watchdog, basically saying the president broke the law when he withheld the aid from Ukraine. So now the Republicans can claim there's no underlying crime. So I think there's a lot of wild cards ahead. I think there's potential there may be witnesses, and I think Mitch McConnell does not want this to turn into a circus. He's really restricted media coverage. And if he doesn't want it to be a circus, I don't know that he can just shut it down if what he doesn't like. You've got a lot of Republicans there who are accountable to more than Trump's base.
Okay, Alexander, how do you see this playing out in the Senate?
I think to Pat's point, if there's a partisan exoneration, just as much as if there's a partisan conviction, it's going to hurt Mitch McConnell ultimately. I mean, what happened to LBJ? He consolidated power, according to the old guard Republicans, without due process, without due deliberation, without due respect. And I think that there will be a wrecking ball at the polls in 2020, even if a Democrat is not elected president, that McConnell will lose his seat.
But it is interesting that we saw Martha McSally, for example, obviously under pressure in Arizona, very tough re-election race there, but responding to a journalist with perhaps not as much nuance as some might expect in that race. Understatement.
They're all in. I mean, they're on this deep red strategy. Which
do you think any
backfire.
Republican senators will flip?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I agree in terms of the great divide that we have been seeing building here in recent years is still with us, more so than it was in Bill Clinton's time, for that matter, and although it's all part of the same process. And I think that I expected it to be closer, maybe not a landslide like you seem to be predicting, because we are, like I've said this before, I'd say about 80-85% of the country already knows what they're going to vote for. They're not going to change much, so it's going to come down to the last minute.
So you don't think any Republicans will flip?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Tom, let me look. What is the basis here? One of the bases of the Republican votes is this. This does not rise to the level of not only impeachable, but a crime that would cause the President of the United States, elected President, the government to be overthrown. You've got, if it's true, You've got Trump, holding up military aid and denying a meeting to the president of Ukraine until you give us a press conference saying you're doing this. That may not be the nicest thing in the world, but the idea that the government of the United States could be overthrown for this nonsense is preposterous.
Tell the GAO, tell that to the
The
GAO.
GAO does not run
Donald
the
Trump.
government. The
The
GAO
GAO
is
made a
going
very
to
good
Donald
point.
Trump is not synonymous with the entire government.
Yeah,
He's the head of state and head of government, and he's commander in chief.
that
Those
will
are pretty
be-
big jobs.
that will be argued next week, and I think the 7 House managers represent America. It's a very different.
They all Democrats?
They are women, African
Are they
Americans,
Democrats?
and they're Democrats. Unlike what
That's
happened.
America?
What are you trying? Yes. That's the diversity of America. They represent the diversity of America. Unlike the 13 white men who marched over when President Clinton was being impeached. So I think people are going to watch this. They're going to hear the arguments. Pat, please let me finish. They're going to hear the arguments played out. And those Republicans are really sweating it out right now because they don't want to look like they're covering up and they're restraining evidence from coming forward. That is not a good position to be in November of 2020 or in the history
Let
books
me ask you,
going forward.
how badly were the Republicans hurt by voting unanimously to reject this impeachment in the House?
We've learned
Look,
more
this
since
is
then.
this
The
is
GAO
not
made
about
a very
appearance.
good point,
Let
Pat.
Pat finish, and then I'll come back
This
to you.
is not about appearances. It is about whether we're going to remove the President of the United States for this Mickey Mouse thing.
Well,
Okay,
we're
Clarence,
not-
Clarence,
The
time.
GAO made a very good point, and it's not Mickey Mouse, that the president cannot take it upon himself to redirect funds that have been authorized and, by Congress and sent for one purpose, and then to repurpose it behind
Agreed,
everybody's
Clarence,
back.
but do you throw out the President of the United States for doing that?
I
Maybe
don't.
you should.
All right.
It's unconstitutional.
Quickly, Eleanor, quickly.
I
yeah.
don't believe he's going to be removed from office. So you can rest on that.
Should he be, though, Pat says?
I would vote to remove him, but the votes are not there. But the public should see all the evidence and why he is being impeached, and more evidence has come out, and
Wait,
so
wait.
this is going to proceed. This is a good thing.
But
This
I
is our
agree.
government
Wait.
working.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay,
I
Pat.
agree. Look, the House managers should come over and present their case.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. Should go right up to the end. And then Mitch McConnell should say, let's vote on whether or not this is sufficient to remove the president, and let's acquit him or convict him, and then acquit him.
Okay, let me ask Alexander a question here. Why? One of the things I was perplexed by, obviously this is a battle of persuasion ultimately, and it's going to be rendered politically in 2020, November this year. Why pick Adam Schiff to lead that? Because I think for obviously many Republicans, but also quite a few independents, his credibility was pretty seriously damaged by his deception in Congress.
The Republicans view Schiff the way that the Democrats, at least the majority of Democrats, view Nunes and,
Right.
and his conduct of the Intelligence Committee. It's a tragic story in American lore that we can't operate a committee dedicated to neutral
And yet, and I'm going to use,
intelligence.
and I'll come back to you. One of the interesting things, though, is in the Senate, Warner and Burr have a very good relationship. A very constructive relationship. Anyway, continue.
Well, the fact that Bob Mueller is not in the special counsel's office anymore is concerning. It should be concerning to Americans because the disinformation is rampant and it continues. And it will adversely affect the cause of democracy in the United States and around the world. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. I don't think that the Democrats, I don't think the majority of Americans want this impeachment trial to turn into a spectacle that Russian disinformation hijacks. And if it does, it will ultimately be on McConnell's
Why
watch.
the pens? Why, if it's so serious, then why does Pelosi hand out pens?
Well, that might have been an optical, tactical mistake, but at the end of the day, what Pat refers to as a Mickey Mouse charade in his judgment, foreign policy is serious matter. Whether or not the President of the United States has the prerogative to dictate foreign policy, well, that's constitutional. I go back to emoluments. The truth of the matter is this case that ought to be fought against the
Why don't
President of
you
the
go
United
back-
States is far more pervasive in terms of the criminality and the
Look, if
high
you-
crimes
Let's
and
Pat,
misdemeanors.
and then
Let's
hold
live
on,
with
hold
abuse
on.
of power and obstruction.
Pat.
Look, we started off with collusion and conspiracy. It was investigated for 2 years. Trump was accused of treason. Now, treason is an impeachable crime. treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors, not whether the GAO liked something or other. But you're exactly right. Why would you send Adam Schiff to lead your cause over to the Senate when he says with every vibe he's got, this is a partisan Democrat attack on Trump?
Eleanor.
I did not hear Mr. Schiff say this is a partisan Democratic attack on Trump. That's right. You said he said it. Yeah. And so I'm calling you out on that.
But do you think it's a good choice?
I do think he's a good choice. And I think anybody with an open mind is going to, what you're referring to is he did a sort of a poetic charade, making up dialogue. That was a stupid thing to do, but otherwise he has handled it, I think, with great aplomb, and I think he does a good job.
Yeah, it's just the kind of thing you need to do to fight Donald Trump. It was just the kind of speculative fireworks that are required in political warfare. And so from that perspective, Schiff should be complimented by Democrats, and that's why they have confidence in him, and you don't want him on stage.
You're exactly right in your phrase, political warfare. That's what this is, not a trial.
You know, the
continuation of tweets by other means?
Dale Bumpers, who defended Clinton, he said, whenever they say it's not about sex, it's about sex. Whenever they say there's no crime here, there's a crime here. So this is a fervent effort to cover up what this president has done.
All right, well, let's go into the side. Clarence, if there were to be any defections from the Republican side, at least defections in the sense of Mitch McConnell seemingly have built this firewall, who do you think would be names that might be there?
Well,
Collins.
I have, I've heard Collins' name mentioned a lot here today. In fact, but I'm keeping an eye on Mitt Romney. He has been kind of setting himself up to be a professional waverer, one who may go with actual evidence.
Well, Romney, Collins, and Murkowski have been the three all of the Democrats have been citing. But that doesn't get you anywhere because you need 51. You need a fourth Republican, and a number of Republicans have sort of stuck their head up and say maybe they might be the fourth. If there are four, there could be six. The wild card here, please let me finish. The wild card here is the Chief Justice. And if there's a tie, he can break it because there's precedent there going back to 1868 and Samuel Chase. So I don't know how much Justice Roberts, but if he's called on to defend the Constitution, he comes down on the side of the Constitution.
The name you're looking for is Lamar Alexander. On Friday morning, it was being talked about that he might vote for witnesses. But what these folks have got to realize that are going to vote for witnesses is what they're trying to get the Senate of Mitch McConnell to do is to do the job of investigation and getting all the evidence there, which will convince the Senate. And the Senate should not do the House's work for it.
Quick, no, Hefner.
Yes.
All right.
Rogan.
Any flips?
I don't think they're going to be flips.
What about on the Democratic side?
I don't think so either. But now you have Van Drew. He's a Republican, so that counts as Republican. But here's the point. I thought it was going to be in the best interest of the Democrats to hold the articles. And this is why. The Supreme Court is going to be ruling on whether or not Bolton can silence himself because of executive privilege. The Supreme Court's going to be ruling.
He wants to testify now. Apparently.
Right, apparently, but the Supreme Court is going to be ruling, not the United States Senate, on whether or not the tax returns have to become public ultimately, Trump and his business returns. Those are the evidentiary basis.
I'll give Eleanor the concluding comment.
There are so many conflicts of interest here of people judging and ruling and so forth, but I think this is a moment for Justice Roberts to stand up for the rule of law and the court that is above politics.
My personal opinion, unless you've got audio of the president, you're overturning the verdict of the people, and that's a step too far. Anyway, issue 2, the battle for the left flank.
Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed.
The battle for the left flank of the Democratic presidential primaries escalated this week with fiery exchanges between Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. With the Iowa caucuses approaching on February 3rd, Democrats are desperate to grasp new opportunities to grow their bases. But watch what happened at the debate's conclusion.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What?
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
Let's not do it right now. You want to have that discussion, we'll have that discussion. You called me a liar.
Eleanor, do you see this as being a great opportunity for Joe Biden to come back in and sort of reconsolidate that lead?
I think he came back and reconsolidated the lead before
Okay.
this debate. I don't think this debate makes much of a difference, and I think the Biden resiliency is still on display, and I think if he can finish well enough in Iowa and New Hampshire, he's in the game. If he wins those 2 states, he's the nominee. What went on between Warren and Sanders is, they did sit down before they announced to run for the presidency, and I'm sure they wargamed who had the better chance, and neither one of them was going to bow out. And so they came up with this non-aggression pact, and it broke apart. And I suspect that the leaks about that conversation came from the Warren camp. I mean, she's trying to reverse her dip in the polls. And I don't count her out because she has a very good ground game in Iowa. She could still do well. And Sanders, he's in it for the duration.
Yeah, Pat.
I tend to agree with Eleanor a lot of it, but I think this is a very wounding thing to do, and I think it's got a real effect. Let's say that Bernie, who was really on a surge as Warren was dropping, let's say that Bernie halts and starts falling back. His people are going to be extraordinarily bitter because this is a very wounding charge. Secondly, I do agree, look, if Biden wins Iowa or New Hampshire, I think he lasts till he hits South Carolina, his base, and he goes to the nomination. But I do think there's a permanent breach in the left wing of the Democratic Party because of this.
Oh.
And I think at least between the 2 leaders, I don't see how you get together. I mean, the 2 of them after
Permanent's
this.
a long time, Pat.
And by that, the two.
Yeah.
But Pat, the 2 leaders there, you mean Warren and
I think
Sanders,
the
or
2
Biden
leaders,
and?
No, the 2 leaders of the progressive wing
Right.
they were handling it very well. One was going to, if I lost, we get behind you, and they had a real chance for the nomination. I think apparently on the Twitter, these Warren people and Bernie people are attacking each other savagely.
Clarence time, yeah.
Well, you said it when you said the progressive wing has 2 leaders. That's what we're dealing with here, and it's happened before. And I can't remember when it's been this bad since like 1972, when the McGovern wing split with the Labor and Mayor Daley wing, if you will. But this kind of thing happens. Will Rogers saw it happen back in the old days. But don't say that Republicans don't have their divides as well.
Well, it happened in 2016, didn't it? With Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. But see how quickly they pulled together, though. Yes.
Eleanor quickly.
Bernie got there first, and he can regard Elizabeth as his protege or his usurper. And right now it's usurper. And the thing is, if his people are going to be as angry at Elizabeth as they were at Hillary, that is so self-defeating. I mean, I do hope that the Bernie supporters, who are very adamant, are going to understand that if he's not the guy or whatever, I mean, I don't know that he's going to get the nomination either. That the main deal here is to defeat Trump.
Look, if they both manage to accrue significant pluralities of the votes in these early states, you may well see a brokered convention ultimately, because so many folks are in the hunt for delegates. And unlike with Donald Trump in 2016, there's not a Democrat who has that vital cult of personality, that kind of overwhelming potence so far. And that's why folks said, and I agreed with a lot of the commentary about Mayor Pete in this most recent debate. He had an opportunity to be that catharsis, to reset
Not
the
in
moment.
South Carolina.
The person who did that most effectively was Elizabeth Warren. And so if she and Sanders can manage 18 to 22% in most of these states competitively, they'll both be a factor.
Pat, let me ask you a question here.
Sure.
To borrow off Alexander, I can't resist this.
He's all wrong, but incidentally.
Will, after many days walking in the rainy fields, the Democratic heart still be in the trim to be able to come together and defeat Trump?
I don't know that it will. Let me just say that if you say that Bernie and Warren can go pari passu together down through the primaries, that is not my experience. When you win a primary, many of the other guys are gone.
Right.
If Bernie wins Iowa and Bernie wins New Hampshire, it's Katie bar the door to Nevada, and it's Bernie versus Biden. As for Biden, as I said, as long as he wins one of those first 2, given where he's at, and the party wants somebody to beat Trump, I think he's okay.
Eleanor, I'll come back.
Bernie and Elizabeth have purposefully de-escalated. So, I really think it's a sideshow.
Okay, Alexander.
Well, I don't know if it's a sideshow. The fact is that these folks are going to be competitive in the long haul. if their grassroots operation in these early states can be formidable and sustained. And, the fact is that what Senator Warren said recently about the factionalism within the Democratic Party, it's not just a global political phenomenon. It's the fact that this factionalism may ultimately usurp the big mo, the momentum you're talking about, the fact that folks are in their camps and they're not really maneuvering so far.
I just want to say two things on that. First of all, the idea of a brokered convention. Thank you. Let it come.
Yeah,
but
we'd all be
the only
in
people
bliss.
rooting for a brokered convention are journalists because we hate boring conventions. There's I think the experience of 2016, we saw there was a fight on the left, and it was followed by apathy and bitterness, and a low turnout for Hillary Clinton. I think this time Democrats are a lot more fired up, and that's like
and sustainable and third-party options also.
Let me ask you a follow-up. Clarence, let me ask you a follow-up question. What do you see happening with Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, let's focus on Tom Steyer and Bloomberg for a second. What is their thought? What is their thought process?
Well, their thought process, I can speculate on for days. I'm more concerned about the voters and the image that they're trying to buy the election. That is hurting them with a lot of people in the rank and file, and I think it bodes ill for them in the future, but who knows? Things are up in the air right now. But I'm looking at real votes. Well, we haven't had any yet. That's a good point. We've had a lot of chatter between the Twitter right and the Twitter left and that kind of thing. And
Bloomberg is spending his money to promote the Democratic cause in swing states. And he's saying, why are we spending all our time in Iowa and New Hampshire, which do not represent the country, and we should be doing these other things. So he's doing more than promoting his candidacy. He's there as a backup if Biden craters.
His hope is for that brokered convention. And also, let me say this, nobody's mentioned Biden. He had a miserable debate.
He mumbled and
told it. He mumbled and stumbled all through that debate. And even, look, there are liberals and Democrats, I watch all the cable networks, et cetera, who were saying, nobody on this stage that we saw tonight can beat Donald Trump. These weren't right-wingers, conservatives. They were liberals and moderates. And I think the Democrats, frankly, are looking at that stage up there. Where's the individual who can beat the guy that was out there in Toledo?
Mr. or Ms. Perfect has not emerged, but Joe Biden will do, and I would not say he had a miserable debate.
Right.
That is a very subjective
You want to
view.
be a vital specimen on that stage. You can talk about your imperfections. That is also the art of politics, but you can't be bumbling, stumbling, fumbling, and you need to be a vital specimen. And he was not until the closing statement. Now, maybe, Pat, he's not taking these folks too seriously until he is the nominee, and he's saving some energy.
But let me ask Pat a question here. You mentioned that point with Joe Biden, and he does seem to have issues with eloquence sometimes, and yet in those swing states, he commands a pretty credible position in all the polls he's seen against Trump. I know it's early, but does President Trump have the vitality in terms of the way his discourse is framed, in terms of values, character, integrity? Perhaps that's Joe Biden's opportunity to come back at him, wouldn't you say?
No, I'm thinking of the two standing up there on a stage in a presidential debate, and Trump, the way he handles himself. I mean, he's amazing as a stump speaker and a rally speaker and the energy he brings. And Joe Biden just mumbles and bumbles, and you put the two up there, and they're going to judge them not on grounds of, quote, who's a more integral individual with greater integrity.
Okay.
It's difficult to go up against an awesome genius, but I do think that Joe Biden can do it.
All right, Clarence, your concluding comment.
Well, I go back to that wonderful line about people aren't going to remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
All right, well,
that's what won it for Donald Trump.
Okay, now some predictions. Pat.
I think Monday we're going to have a rough time down there in Richmond when the gun folks come, and they're not allowed to bring their guns, and they're having the gun debate in the Richmond Assembly.
Okay, Eleanor.
They're not allowed to bring their guns because of all the threats that have
why
emanated.
All right, Eleanor, come on.
I will build on your prediction, and I think that the Richmond speaker, whoever suggested that nobody should bring their guns, that was a very wise decision. Okay. It's not a negative decision.
Okay, Alexander.
The conventional wisdom is that being off the trail will hurt Sanders and Warren. I think that in their cry for anti-corruption measures in this country in the face of Donald Trump, they may actually gain steam even if they're not in New Hampshire and in Iowa these next weeks because they will have moments to illuminate that message, and it will reach the public.
Okay.
On the education front, I'll give a shameless plug to my newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, for their recent series on the problem of these incarceration of students as far as their timeouts, as they're called. There are 4 states, now Illinois is the 5th, to ban this practice of discipline. In other words, put a kid in a room and leave them there in solitary for what can be hours sometimes. And that is not supposed to happen, but it's happening. Betsy DeVos is now being asked to come out with a statement on this. The entire Illinois delegation to Congress is calling for that. And I think she's going to have a statement that will come out against that practice.
Okay, very good. Very in-depth there. I predict that Iranian deniable actors under the Quds Force and proxies, such as the Lebanese Hezbollah, will carry out a near-term lethal attack on American interests. Look at Ayatollah Khamenei's comments. Rouhani is more moderate. Khamenei is not. He wants blood for the death of his friend Qasem. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to join the discussion at McLaughlin.com. Also, check out our podcast on iTunes. See you next time.